Hello, my name is Steve Wells. I'm a futurist and I'm going to be leading the Foresight for a Reinvented Future training with world-class training. So, what are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to explore the importance of foresight. We're going to make sense of the processes and we're going to look at trend analysis, horizon scanning. We'll use a technique called cross-impact analysis, and then we'll get into some scenario planning. Why are we going to do that? Well, because foresight and scenario planning are really helpful for us to think about plausible potential futures. We don't know how the future is going to play out. All we see is increasing uncertainty. So, foresight and the underlying tools and approaches like scenario planning help us make sense of an uncertain future. In turn, that helps us develop robust, flexible, and agile strategies given the uncertain nature of the future. It helps us build resilience. It helps us build options. It helps us mitigate risks, and it helps us identify potential opportunities. But I know you'll have questions, so we've put together a number of questions and answers to help you before coming to the training. Who should attend Foresight for a Reinvented Future? The program has been designed for decision makers, strategists, and leaders inside your organization. It requires people who have the ability to influence the planning process within your organization and to take the tools and techniques that we work on through the program and implement them, and to engage colleagues around the organization. It requires advocacy and it requires an investment of time. But this investment in time is designed to benefit the future of your organization. So if you're a decision maker, if you're a strategist, if you're a planning manager, if you're a leader, and you have an interest in the future, this is the program for you. There are other and perhaps unexpected benefits of using foresight, and particularly in taking your organization through a scenario exercise. Scenario planning is a creative process. We have to understand what the underlying trends are before we can bring them together to create our plausible scenarios. It's also a way of engaging colleagues around the organization with aspects of the future that they wouldn't necessarily get engaged with. And it's even an opportunity to help people see what's important to other functions across the organization. Outputs for scenario planning can be used not only to test existing strategies and find gaps in strategic portfolios, but it can also help engage colleagues around the organization with new strategic themes, with new things that we want the organization to think about. So scenario planning and broader foresight can help engage organization and give benefits to the organization that perhaps we wouldn't gain through existing and more traditional strategic planning techniques. How can scenario planning help with risk mitigation? Well, the core of good quality scenario planning is the development of multiple potential futures. That way, we can look at the risks and potential opportunities across a range of different plausible outcomes, and we can put strategies in place in order to help us cope with those different uncertainties. Not only that, it can help us get used to the idea that the future is uncertain, so it builds our organizational resilience to change and helps us mitigate risk from a much more proactive perspective. Will scenario planning support disaster recovery too? That's a really interesting question. And one of the advantages of scenario planning is it gives us permission to explore the unthinkable within the organization. And if we're able to explore more than one unthinkable outcome, then we can get a sense of what sort of disasters might appear, what sort of disasters we might need to cope with, and we can start to put mitigating factors in place to help us come to terms with those disasters and put effective recovery plans into place as a result. Scenario planning, don't forget, is about plausible potential futures. So there's a lot of overlap here when we think about disaster recovery with risk mitigation as well. Will this program help us to work with and actually use foresight tools and approaches? The answer to that is yes. The program is designed to be very interactive. So from trend analysis to horizon scanning to cross-impact analysis to scenario development, the basic process we'll go through is to explain some of the issues involved in undertaking those tasks. We'll see some examples, and then you'll get a chance for hands-on practice in your work groups. Not only that, we'll design a series of documents that you can collect your feedback, collect the results of your analysis, and you can take them away as well. So not only do you get to practice, not only do you get to see examples, but you get to take away the work that you develop through the program. Can Foresight help us make sense of future consumer demands? And can it help us anticipate changes in our marketplaces? The answer to this is yes. There are two things that we can do with scenario planning. One is look very much at the trends that we see right now, but then we can bring them together with the weaker signals that we see when we look further into the future. What that allows us to do through creating plausible potential scenarios is then look at what might happen to our customers' worlds, look at what might change in the marketplace that we operate in. Because we have different plausible futures when we do that work, we can actually establish a portfolio of different strategies to help us think about what happens to the marketplace. How will our consumers in the future think about the world that they live in and about the value that we give them as part of our services and products? So through the use of scenarios, we can start to understand how our customers and consumers' world will change, and therefore what we might need to do better or differently in order to meet those needs. My organisation has developed post-COVID plans. How will scenario planning and this foresight training help us develop better plans? Well, that's really about using plausible scenarios in a way that helps us look at what might happen. For example, if we look at how the economy might develop and how our ability or otherwise to handle the impact of the pandemic might evolve. That's really important. And in a chapter I contributed to in a book that we published last year called Aftershocks and Opportunities, Scenarios for a Post-Pandemic Future, we explored precisely those two dynamics between the economy and between how the pandemic was handled. And what that can help us understand is the nature of the interaction between those two drivers we might see. And in the stories that we create, the scenarios that we create, we can then start to think about, so what do they mean for us? How are we going to continue to interact with customers, consumers, and other stakeholders in those four different worlds? What are the mitigating things that we might need to put in place into our plans, and whereabouts are the opportunities? So yes, it will certainly help us think about the post-pandemic period. What's the difference between foresight and scenario planning? Well, foresight is the umbrella term underneath which sits a number of different tools and techniques to help us think about the future. On this program, we're going to be looking at four. The first is trend analysis. What is it that we see right now that potentially takes us into the future? The second is horizon scanning. What do we see if we look further ahead in terms of developments, new scenarios, new ideas that we think will have an impact on our future? The third is cross-impact analysis, which is a technique where we take two unrelated trends, look at the intersection, and describe how the future might play out in that context. And the fourth is scenario planning, where we take very uncertain and potentially high impact trends, bring them together, look at the intersections, and describe what those worlds might be like. We can then apply either the other trends that we've been looking at or a series of templated, formatted questions that help us explore what those worlds might be like. The stories that we develop are then the content that we have in order to explore existing or new strategies. What are some of the key takeaways from this program that I'll be able to implement in my organization? Well, the first thing to say about this is this program will arm you with a number of different tools that you can use in your business. So the easiest one to implement will be trend analysis, looking to see how things are starting to evolve and keeping an eye on those to understand how they impact our current operations. If we think about horizon scanning, that's like developing an early warning system to things that are starting to change that will impact our business a little bit later on. Cross-impact analysis, as I described earlier, is a technique that helps us look at the uncertain nature behind the intersection of different trends, whereas scenario planning is a much more complex and detailed exercise to help us think about plausible potential futures. Now, the takeaways that you'll get, it will be an opportunity to practice with those tools and techniques. And as we go through the program, I'll describe how they're used, the benefits of these techniques. But broadly speaking, organizations and successful organizations are increasingly successful because they operate on 3 time horizons in parallel. The first is about operational excellence. It's about winning the race for the current year. The second is about effective strategic planning, and our time horizon on that tends to be based on 2, 3, perhaps up to 5 years when we look into the future. And typically we extrapolate trends from the past to understand how the future may play out. But the very effective longer term approach when we think about strategy and try to identify what the future of our organizations might be about is to use horizon scanning, trend analysis over a longer term, cross-impact analysis and scenario planning. So the Foresight tools. Effective future-proofed organizations have a good approach to foresight. Now, depending upon where you are in your planning cycle, any of these techniques, any of these tools can be brought into your organization in very quick time. If, though, you're just past your last planning cycle, then my suggestion is that you actually start with trend analysis, because if you have small elements of time dedicated to trend analysis, by the time you get to the next planning cycle, you'll have a really great resource of trends, perhaps even scanning the horizon along the way to help you start your scenario planning process to support the next strategic planning round. So this is about giving you the choice which tools, which techniques you use to future-proof your organization. I'm very passionate about thinking about the future. Not necessarily a prediction, but actually to build our awareness of uncertainty in the future. And that's the golden nugget that will tempt us when we think about foresight. It's about helping us develop resilience, flexibility, and become more comfortable with uncertainty. If, like many people, you believe that change is exponential and ever more significant, then actually all these techniques that help us think about the future equip us in a much better way to consider the future. I'm really looking forward to working with you on this program. So welcome to Foresight for a Reinvented Future.